Hey, hello, and welcome to this episode of Learn Everyday English, your roadway to English proficiency. I'm actually in another different room of the house today. I'm trying something new. I'm in the dining room at the dining room table, and I'm using a different camera today. I'm using a GoPro. Sometimes I've used my cell phone, and sometimes I've used my Canon camera, but the GoPro is small. It's easy to set up. I have it on a small tripod and an external microphone. So I'm going to see how this works out. And it's pretty convenient, and it's a lot easier to kind of download the video. On my phone, I have to upload it to the cloud. That takes a while. It's kind of a hassle. So I'm going to see if this works well for me. And I have an interesting video for you today, and it's something very personal. It's about my life, kind of my family, and you could say my heritage, kind of where do I come from. But before I get into that, there's 3 things you can do for me. Hey, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and 3, tell your friends about it so that they can benefit from these videos too, just like you. All right, I'm going to be talking to you today about kind of my family and family origin. A lot of people look at me and sometimes they say, hey, what are you? What are you, Gary? What's your ethnicity? What's your race? How do you identify? And sometimes people don't really know, but I have nothing to hide. So I am African American, but I may not look it because I guess my family and my parents were from Louisiana. And Louisiana is a state to the east of Texas. And it's an interesting state. And that's what I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. But so, in Louisiana, there's a lot of people of different skin colors, different complexions, we say. From dark to very light to mixture in between. And Louisiana has an interesting history. It had a lot of mixing of the races, we could say, and that's why you have people of all different skin colors or skin tones there. And my parents kind of were no different. My mom was a little darker skinned African American person, and her family was a little darker skinned, but my father's side of the family was, we say, light skinned. So that's why I turned out this way. And I want to give you a little history on Louisiana first. I'm going to show you some kind of family photos, and so hopefully you'll find this video interesting and maybe educational and informative. So I got notes I'm going to be looking from, so I may be looking down and reading some notes, and I have I've organized some photos, so I got to look to see what photo I'm going to be showing for each thing I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to be looking around a little bit. So don't get distracted. Just stay with me. Follow me. So in Louisiana, there's an area called Acadiana. And just so you know, my father was born and grew up in a small town called Opelousas, Louisiana. Or as they say in French, Opelousas. And then my mom was born in really a very small, it's not even a city, just an area called Plaisance, like a French name, Plaisance, Louisiana. The only thing that they had there was a school and a church. That was it, and a flashing kind of yellow light. There were no other buildings, just most people lived on farms, and they farmed. It was a farming community. So my mom grew up on a farm. And it was fun as a kid because we would go there every summer and spend some time in the farm. And they had, corn and cotton, and they had farm animals, horses and cows and pigs and chickens and geese in the barn. And so it was a typical farm where they would grow things. And my mom grew up on the farm, having to work on the farm. And my dad kind of grew up more in the city because Opelousas was a city, probably about 20 minutes from Plaisance. But in Louisiana, there's an area called Acadiana, which is kind of in the southwest part of Louisiana. And it's a pretty big area that we say encompasses or includes 22 parishes. So in Louisiana, instead of using the word county, as we say here in the United States, or county, they use parish. So Acadiana is a area that includes 22 parishes or counties in the French, we say French Louisiana, which is in the southern part of the state. And we say it stretches from the Gulf of Mexico to about 100 miles inland or from the coast into the state. And it covers about 14,500 square miles. And here's a map of Acadiana. So you can get your bearings. You can get your bearings, and you can kind of find out and see where everything is located at. So what happened was, there were some French-speaking people that were living in Canada. And in the 17th century, they were called Acadians. So these French-speaking Canadian people were living in Canada, and it was kind of taken over and started to be ruled by the English, or we could say the British, in 1713. And here's a photo or a map. I think I have a map. Yes, or just a photo of kind of a depiction of what that kind of looked like, with the Acadians and their land area being taken over by the English. But the thing was, the Acadians didn't want to pledge allegiance. They didn't want to follow or be under the control of the English or the British. So the English and the British, they threw them out of Canada. They kicked them out by British forces, the British Army, in 1755. And about 3,000 Acadians, or these French-speaking people that were living in Canada, they eventually arrived in South Louisiana between the dates of 1764 to 1785. So I think here's a map showing kind of how the French Canadians left Canada, the route they took, and eventually arrived in Louisiana. So initially, these Canadian people that arrived in the southwest part of Louisiana were called Creole. And this term really had no racial designation. It didn't mean anything, by race. So it didn't matter if you were black, white, indigenous, or mixed. Hey, people were just called Creole. It simply meant someone who was native to the colony, which is the colony there in Louisiana that they started when they arrived. And it generally meant French-speaking people who were also Catholic. So Creole meant anybody living there in southwest Louisiana who were generally spoke French and were Catholic. And as things usually happen, when the Acadians arrived, there were other people there already in southwest Louisiana. Like I said, some indigenous Indians were already living there. Some other, say, Anglo white people were living there. Maybe a few dark-skinned people. So they started to mix, or we say intermingle or mix. And they adopted the local culture, including the Creole identity. So they said, oh yeah, we're Creole, just like these other people that are here in Louisiana. And they did this in the first 2 generations of the people that were there. So this mixing and assimilating, we could say, or intermingling, contributed to a process that we now know as creolization, or just making things more Creole-like. And this was kind of, we say, fueled by the European colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade. So you guys probably know or have heard about the transatlantic slave trade, where a lot of Africans were taken from their countries in Africa and brought over to the Caribbean and to the United States to be slaves and to work on plantations. So this creolization occurred where different populations blended their native cultures and customs and practices, like culinary, which means their food, linguistic means like their speaking, and their musicality or their music that they played. This all began to be mixed together and to create a new cultural form. But then starting in 1920, as a part of a nationwide effort to unite the country's many ethnic groups under the English language, so this is something that happened in South Louisiana, children began to be punished for speaking French in school. So it wasn't looked upon as something that people wanted other people to do. They say, hey, you don't speak French, you need to speak English. You're in the United States, you're in Louisiana, speak English. So children began to be punished for speaking French in school. Thus the people slowly began to stop speaking and passing the language to their children. And French Creole, which was the type of French that was being spoken in Louisiana, because remember the Canadians, they were French speaking, they came to Louisiana, they brought their language, they brought French with them and created kind of what's called a French Creole language. But now, because the state didn't want people to speak French, the kids stopped speaking it and the language slowly began to disappear. And then here's a photo of just something about Louisiana French. And interestingly enough, something you might find fascinating is that my parents both spoke Creole French. But sadly, I didn't learn to speak it because they only spoke it around me when they didn't want me or my brother to know what they were talking about. So it was something that I never learned. And it is a language that is slowly dying off here in Louisiana, or there in Louisiana. And then by the 1920s, they had what we call in the United States Jim Crow laws. Have you heard of that? Jim Crow laws, where it kind of separated the white people from the non-white people. And the Jim Crow laws were state and local laws introduced in the southern United States in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries, and it enforced racial segregation, and Jim Crow was a pejorative or like a bad or negative term that people would use to describe African American people. And these laws actually remained in force until 1965. So these were called Jim Crow laws. So you might say, hey Gary, what did they actually really do? So here are some photos about Jim Crow laws, pictures of things that were going on at this time. There were separate places for, say, washing, laundry companies. Here's one that says we only wash for white people only. They didn't accept any wash or clothing from black people. The next is a sign that shows a waiting room, and it says colored waiting room. So they had different waiting rooms, say in hospitals for black people and white people. But sometimes they would call the black people colored people. Here's another picture showing there were separate restrooms for black and white people. So here's a sign that says white and colored. So the colored meant for black people. And here's another photo which is showing a water fountain. There were separate water fountains for black people and white people. So these things happened, and they were all covered under Jim Crow laws that were established here in the United States to separate the white people from the non-white people. There was also another rule, maybe it was kind of unwritten, I don't know if it was written or unwritten, was called the one-drop rule. And it was a legal principle of racial classification, and it was very popular in the 20th century. And it said or asserted that any person with even one ancestor of black ancestry is considered black. So if you had a black great-great-great-grandfather, you were considered to be black. If you had a black uncle, you were considered to be black. So if you had one drop of black blood, you could say, you were considered black. So this is the one-drop rule of racial purity. It kind of undermined, or it was the basis for segregation. And what happened, we had these white French people from Canada. Remember, they came to Louisiana, they started calling themselves Creole, but remember, Creole included black people, Indian people, and everybody that was mixed. But with this one-drop rule, the white Creole people were getting uncomfortable because they didn't want to have the label of Creole, because they didn't want to be kind of included or mixed in with this designation of being black, because the Creoles, the black people, were considered black. If you had Indians or some black in your family, you were considered black. So they didn't want to be associated with the term Creole at all. So they dropped the term Creole and they just called themselves something else. So today, the common understanding is that there are people in Louisiana that are white. They are referred to as Cajun people. And the Creole people today in Louisiana are really the black people or the people of mixed ethnicity, like myself, called Creole. So like today, the white people are called Cajuns, and the black or mixed people are called Creoles. Like I said, my mom grew up in Plaisance. Here's kind of a sign, and it's an incorporated community in St. Landry Parish. Remember, parish is a county, and it is the location of the Plaisance School. And actually, the school is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and it actually is the home to the Southwest Louisiana Zydeco Music Festival. And Zydeco is a very popular and famous type of music, kind of played by the Creole people in Louisiana. So that's called Zydeco music. And remember, the white Cajun people also have music, and that's called Cajun music. So there's a little bit difference. Zydeco music and Cajun music. Like I said before, my dad grew up in Opelousas. It's a small city, and it's in the parish of St. Landry Parish. And according to the 2020 census, it has a population of about 16,000 people. 16,000 people. And interestingly enough, kind of outside of Opelousas, there's a kind of well-known horse race track called Evangeline Downs Racetrack, and there's also a casino there, a casino. And I'll tell you a little bit about growing up. Growing up in Louisiana, I remember when my dad got out of the Army, we moved there for a short period of time. Then he, enrolled in the military. We moved around a little bit, but once he retired, we moved to Houston. But every summer, we would spend like 2 months in Louisiana with my grandmother and aunt and living with them, so in Opelousas. And I could tell you, to me, Opelousas was backwards. I say backwards, like it wasn't normal. The race relations weren't normal because there wasn't a lot of mixing of the races when I was a kid living there. The black people kind of had their own neighborhood. To me, it seems like most of the black people lived in one part of the city. Most of the white people lived in another part of the city. And there wasn't really a close mixing. And of course, it seemed like the white area was much nicer than the black area. The homes were nicer. They had better parks. And I remember the white park was very nice. The black park was kind of run down. It didn't have as many, playground equipment for the kids. It wasn't maintained as well. So, yeah, I grew up with this kind of maybe idea or seeing Louisiana, and to me, I said I'd use the word, it was backwards. It wasn't normal. It was kind of in the past, you could say. And so that was kind of my experience with Louisiana. But I have some good memories too there, and that's where, my family grew up at. And my family was close on both sides, my mother and father. And we would have family reunions a lot where we would get together with family. We would visit all the time. Even when it wasn't the summer, we would go visit family in Louisiana, and we had a lot of cousins because my dad's family was just my dad and his sister, just two. But my mom, there were 10 children in all, so I had a whole bunch of cousins. on my mom's side of the family. And speaking of family, I wanted to show you some pictures. So here's a picture of my dad when he was in the Army. He was in Vietnam. He worked in the port, actually, kind of logistics. But for some reason here, he's standing beside by a helicopter. But he wasn't a helicopter pilot. But here he is in Vietnam. Here's a picture of my mom and dad, I guess sitting on a couch in my grandmother's house, my dad's mother's house. And here's a picture of my mom and dad and my grandmother, my dad's mother. And we called her Big Mom. She was Big Mom. And then here's a picture of my mom's family out in the country at the farm where my mom grew up at. Her parents are in the center, and I think my mom's on the far right of the picture. So you see it was a big family. Here's a picture of my brother and I and my dad. And then here's a picture of my brother, and you might have seen him before because he was on several videos that I've done on this channel. But as you can see, my mom was a darker skinned, African American woman or person, and my dad and his mother were much lighter skinned. And interesting to me, in some pictures, my dad looks like he could have a little bit of Asian in him. I'm not sure. But the final thing I want to close out is I did a DNA test a while back from Ancestry DNA to kind of see, what is my ancestral heritage? Where did my ancestors come from? And I'm going to put this depiction on the screen, but, we knew that since my family spoke Creole French and my dad's side of the family was very light-skinned, there was probably a lot of the French ancestry on my dad's side. And this was verified from the DNA information that I got back, which shows that 26% from France. Then the second highest category was 20% from Mali, which is West Africa, which wasn't a surprise. Then 18%, this kind of surprised me, was from Ireland and Scotland. 15% was from Benin and Togo, which is African countries, West Africa. 6% Senegal, which is West African. 4% Cameroon, Congo, Southern Bantu people, which is Africa. 4% Native American, North, Central, and South. 2% East African. 1% Portugal. 1% Ivory Coast, Ghana, which is in Africa. 1% Sweden, 1% Italy, and 1% Middle East, with less than 1% the Philippines. So it's interesting to see that if I group these together, 47% of my ancestral heritage is African, 20% is from France or French, 18% is from Ireland and Scotland, and 4% is Native American. That's the main categories. So that's 95%. So that's kind of what I'm made up of, is African, French, Irish, Scottish, and Native American for the most part. So what do you think about that? Were you surprised or not? So let me know what you think in the comments. And hey, in your country, is there a lot of mixing of the races, or people from different ancestries or backgrounds, or is it somewhat more of a pure, say, one or two kind of racial backgrounds? Let me know in the comments what you think. So I think that's all I had to talk to you today about. I think it's something different, something interesting, and hope you like the video. So remember, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and 3, tell your friends about it. Hey, well, have a good week wherever you are in this world, and we'll see you later on Learn Everyday English. Bye-bye.